Data-driven health. Moderated by James Somauroo, SOMX. With Erik van der Zijden, Synappz Digital Healthcare. Dr. Conrad Attard, University of Malta. Alexei Bono, Idea Group. And 𝐂𝐨𝐦𝐿𝐴.
Hello everybody. My name is James Somauroo. I am an anaesthetics and intensive care doctor by background, and I'm currently the founder and CEO of SOMX, which is a health tech specific communications agency. I'm also the host of the Health Tech podcast, which you can get everywhere that you listen to podcasts, and editor of the Health Tech Pigeon newsletter, which will be an online publication as well by next year. I have a panel with me today to talk about data-driven health. So obviously technology is enabling us to collect and harness so much data now to improve human health, and we're going to be talking about how that is happening, some of the challenges, and if we've got time, where the responsibility might lie as well. So I'd like to go down the line here and get my panel to introduce themselves. So Alexei.
Good morning, I am Alexei. I'm the Director of Idea Intelligence, part of Idea Group. We're basically a data science company.
Erik.
My name is Erik van der Zijden. I'm from the Netherlands, and we have a startup scale-up in digital healthcare, building a scalable platform for any kind of patients and conditions.
I'm Conrad Attard from University of Malta. I'm a lead researcher for PEM, and also, in my free time, I do a lot of STEM initiatives.
Excellent. So I'd like to start, guys, by talking about what data-driven health actually means to you. So maybe, Alexei, based on the work that you do, what does that term mean to you, and why should health tech companies, or indeed any company really, be data-driven?
Yeah, I will echo what has been said so far, that data and health and tech basically have been intertwined since the get-go. So I see this happening forever. The way that I see this happening now, the turning point that's going to happen now, is that we're going to see an ecosystem. And I will summarize it in 3 pillars. So we'll start with the patient data first, then we'll move on to the privacy and security aspect of it, and then the research side of things. Starting from the patient data first, this is where obviously we want to discuss how the patient data is stored, used, how it's given purpose. And I'm not just talking about what we see now, where entity A has the patient's data, then you go to entity B, they also have the patient's data. I would like to see it go to a way where the patient owns his or her own data. So I'm talking about a sovereign world. And imagine why, because gone are the days where you're going to see yourself going to one practitioner for every single thing. You will go to expert A for case study A, expert B for case study B. Now imagine if you have to transfer data that you gave expert A into expert B. Mistakes will be made, data will be doubled, so on and so forth. So the best way to tackle that is a sovereign ownership of the patient's data. If the patient makes the data, the patient should own it. And that leads us to pillar 2, the privacy aspect of it. So you're telling me, like, are we stuck on the privacy aspect where it's so sensitive? Because name me a more personal thing than your own health. But fortunately, we're in Europe, the home of where GDPR lives, and it established the proper ground of how to treat personal data. Because while health is the most personal thing, it's not the only. So what the health industry needs to do, look at what other industries are doing to tackle the privacy aspect, and we just apply it to health. Once those 2 pillars are taken care of, we can move on to the third and final one, the cool stuff. Innovation. So we have seen AI being mentioned in tech, automation, deep learning, all of that good stuff. This will obviously help us get to where we want to get, but all of these things are tackling what I like to call unknown unknowns. We don't know the answer of what we want so far, and we don't know how to get there yet. This is why we research. So like we have an ecosystem of entities talking to each other with the patient in mind, we should also have, instead of trying to look at one model fits all, because it's never going to happen, it's not the way AI works, you will have tiny models tackling their own individual thing, communicating with each other, and both at the patient at the center. That's how I see it, a big ecosystem of things happening with the patient at the center.
And that's a good system view, I suppose. But I guess I'm interested in your view, Erik, on this. So from your view as founder, CEO of a company that is obviously generating data based on what you're doing, and then you're using that data to improve things and ultimately get value back to a patient. What does being data-driven mean to you as a company?
Well, I think the data is the raw material for creating value, right?
Yeah.
And by saying, okay, is data already providing value in the healthcare system? I guess yes, because in many situations already, patients are being monitored within a hospital, and almost all decisions, of course, are made on data. The thing is, of course, that if we want to really extend healthcare also outside of the hospitals, and being able patients to recover home, we need to be able to also find ways to collect the data when patients step out of the hospitals, and I always say when they become a human being again and not a patient anymore, exactly. Right? And I think that most data then we miss, because we always say patients should go home, but home is a kind of a black box. There is no home in the system that we have currently. So when we talk within our company about data, is the data that is generated by a patient when they are at home. But you can only generate data, and I think you already said that, when you provide a value for the patient. Because saying to a patient, collect data, I say, yeah, for what? Yeah, for your health. So you have to give something back. And it's really important to figure out what this value add would be for the patient. And then again, building a platform that's then also truly scalable, because at the moment there are 450,000 healthcare related applications available. 450,000. And that's just mind-boggling. But how do you scale up? And that's a tricky question, I guess. Yeah.
It's a huge challenge. So you mentioned there are so many data points that are being generated, and both in hospitals, outside. If we were able to collect more of this data, is this data going to save us? Or do you see a world where we are harnessing this data? Or are there key challenges that are going to stop us from doing that?
There are key challenges, well, not for stopping us from doing it, but hindering the progress, I would say. And I guess we can fill an entire conference with that. But in the end, I think there will be a world where this data becomes much more available. But again, the trick is to transform this data into knowledge, and then into, I would say, wisdom for the patient and the healthcare provider to actually do something with it. But I keep optimistic about the future in that respect.
Excellent. So, Conrad, to realize all of these benefits and help us get to this point where we are harnessing a lot of this data, what do you think is important for companies to consider, or indeed the whole ecosystem to consider? How do we get there quicker, better?
I come from a bit of a challenging environment, especially the work which we focus on is very particular. A lot of our work is dealing with elderly and particularly with patients with dementia. What makes it challenging is that data is really needed. It doesn't have space to be wrong, because the minute the data and the processes and the ideas that we invent fail, even with a small percentage, there is where concerns start. So when we speak about this topic, we have to put a context as well. Understanding which data and where this is going to be applied. Our ambitions is to, as fast as possible, seeing our ideas being used. But the result to get to that point means that data, and a lot of data, is required. And there is a context where as you were mentioning, Alexei, the patient and having access to that data and
control.
Yes, and the aspect of GDPR, and you mentioned Europe, but I would like to bounce off something to you after this. But the fact that we have GDPR, sometimes there are certain types of restrictions which our process takes a bit longer with good faith until we can do certain things. So our team, when we start with an idea and we're working on research, it always boils down, do we have the data? If we don't have the data, can we create the data? Can that data really represent the true, real environments? And how much of this data can we use because of these restrictions? So,
do you find this, since we are such a small country, okay? Once someone asked me this, like, they told me, imagine that you have a sickness or a condition that's so rare, and like only 3 people on the island have it. And let's say that all the data is anonymous, okay? Yet you see these 3 records. We are such a small island, as we say in Malta, everyone knows everyone. Is that if you check the conditions, the locality and age, you're bound to say, I know who that is.
Yes, that's a reality, in fact. We had a study recently, last year, which was being conducted, and we had 4. And innocently, because I wasn't involved in the study directly, I asked, how come you're trying to limit your findings with 4? Well, in Malta, we have 4 that suffered that condition. And that was quite interesting. Yet, because of the determination, it was quite interesting how the outcomes of that study. Although it's a small study and there is a problem of identifying these people, there is a reality. And I think in startups, Erik, you must have this challenge now, that when you're starting off an idea and you want to really get it out there, you're going to find these type of environments where does the data you have be good enough for that environment? I don't know if you are going to have concern that the delay is creating it, using it, accessing it.
Yeah, well, it really depends what you want to do with the data, because if the patient has a direct relationship with the care provider, you know, they should use the data, right? And depending on what kind of data points you collect from the patient and then in which clinical area you are. But if you want to do clinical research, of course, that's a totally different ballgame, right? But you will always find the challenges in order to collect the data and do it in the right way. I think the GDPR is a good thing because privacy is really important. I also believe that privacy by design, when you start from scratch by having the GDPR in the back of your mind, you can create solutions that comply to it. So it's not an excuse not to do stuff. Of course, I don't know the dynamics of your islands. If you say, yeah, we have only 4 people, so we know exactly who they are. The Netherlands is also a small country, but you know, a bit more populated.
I agree, and I'm all for it because it's not the first time that I want to do something and I don't have the info. I'm like, this will hinder me immediately. So at least if we move on to this idea where someone has control over their data, they can just tell me, sure, you can have my health records, but I just won't share my age. I won't share where I'm from. But you can have the symptoms, for instance. This will get me going. That will keep them safe at the same time.
So way back in 2013, when we were starting off some of the projects, we noticed that UK had pushed a very strong initiative for industry to get data sets out there, real data, and they created a structure which allowed patients or people, because let's be realistic. Sometimes we do discuss the data from patients, but we are extremely interested for the data to prevent. So we need also that data, and we want people to be engaged with us even before we actually are dealing with them in either through hospitals or medical care. And it was very interesting that some of the best data sets, so there was a very interesting article and some journal papers related to that, were relating also to data which is not only related to patients, that is people that are diagnosed with an illness, but also data that is before. And we're lucky because today a lot of people are engaging with wearables. And there is where a lot of data, very personalized data, is being But what is happening? Is it being collected? And if it is being collected, is it reaching the right industries that can do very good for this?
Since we're talking a lot about barriers and in some terms enablers as well, what about something like regulation? Where does regulation sit? Is that an enabler? Is it a barrier? I imagine you sit in different places on this, potentially.
My experience, sometimes it's really a tough challenge. But you learn to respect that because they are protecting how data is being used. Everybody is concerned with that. But in our world of research, where most of the time we're dealing with the next thing that needs to happen, and sometimes we just need some particular. You know, in our area, location, for example, is a big challenge. We use location because our research is related to the elderly, because we can learn a lot about that person's activity, because our work is related to human activity. And that aspect of location, especially dealing with people that can't really take certain decisions because of their condition, that becomes a big problem. But with time, well, tomorrow I have a keynote speech about this, so I won't. Can I leave that for tomorrow? we came up with some good ideas.
I think it was interesting this morning because we started with the regulation part, which is good because then we have it out of the way, I guess. But so when we started 10 years ago, we developed an app for it was avoiding diary, and 10 years ago it was like ages ago in the digital health space, that was supposed to be an CE certified medical app. And we were the first in the Netherlands to certify it according to the MDD, right? And then, of course, the MDR came and is now conquering the world, so to say. And if you ask me, so what is it a friend or is it a foe? It really depends, I guess, in which angle you look at. But from the start, I think when you make a breast implant or something what goes in your body or on your body, yes, you gotta have an MDR. However, what they did now is to put the digital health and the MedTech on one pile and say, we have one regulations and that's it. And there, I think we go wrong, because a digital healthcare product is not the same as a MedTech product. And if you truly want to innovate, if you now see what we have to do to comply to the MDR, it will cost me per, let's say, application we build, something like 50 to 100K, to be able to comply to the MDR class 2A. And that is seriously hindering innovation, because who is going to pay for that? Are my clients going to pay for that? No. Am I going to pay for that? No. So there is where we're stopping. So I really plea for a kind of an MDD plus or an MDR light version for digital healthcare products.
Do you think that this situation comes from trying to apply a one-size-fits-all kind of deal? I think so, yeah.
I don't know exactly. Well, I do know where it's coming from, but I think as the EU, we tend to over-regulate sometimes certain things. And if you look at the US, the FDA also has, of course, regulation, but for digital healthcare, they have a better, easier process. And then you see innovation, apart from all kind of other aspects, of course, in that country, going much faster. And I think we really have to be careful in the EU not to lose our, place.
So is that a realistic solution then, you think, an MDR light or some light version, or would it require far more groups or groupings that have more specific requirements? What is the realistic solution here? Because clearly, as you've said, there's stifling going on. There's going to be stifling of innovation. There's going to be people paying for the prices going up, companies needing to raise more funding. It's becoming a barrier, at least from a financial perspective, clearly, in practical terms. What is the realistic solution to that? Is there one?
I don't know, maybe you have more sight on that?
Well, realistic solutions to this is a matter of how policies are being conducted within the different areas. And whose
responsibility is that? So you're talking government level policy?
not only, yes, government policy or big entities, big industries that can influence. We just see how it works locally, and even colleagues in our team, which are international people, members, how they tackle it. There is an option where institutes create the policies and the mechanisms in place to facilitate this process. So it won't be just me or my team or anybody in my research going there and doing all the job, and the next day our colleagues Erik and yourself going separately for different things. And it's not only about the policy, it's also even the time and whatever is entailed to that. When we go to an entity and we want to use data sets, and I must say we do it very often in our case because we depend on that, it is a long process. So if policies are in place and entities like the example I mentioned in 2013, where the companies which have the data are already enabling and getting this data available, we can work a bit the other way around. We can get inspired from this data which is validated. We get a lot of people working on the same data, so it facilitates, minimizes this aspect of repeating.
Well, it's back to what you said, Alexei, at the start, isn't
Exactly.
it, about an ecosystem, right? It's that exact approach. So with all this in mind, I'm interested then, I suppose, in what you do for your clients. I mean, how do you get companies to set themselves up for success when it comes to data-driven healthcare? What is it that you advise them to do?
Yeah, at first when I started, I had the wrong idea that when I'm going to apply this new tech to your company, when I'm going to apply this new system, everything's going to be all sunshine and rainbows and it's going to be all right. Everyone will listen to what I say. No. What I learned that the common denominator in each of the cases is to get data moving, as I like to say. And it echoes exactly what you wanted to say. Unless you get people comfortable in working with this kind of thing and not this kind of person or this kind of person, from the ground up, from the bottom layer to the high decision makers, because they are the decision makers for a purpose, unless they get comfortable in trusting the information that they have. And notice how I said info, not data, because data, static data by itself is useless. You need to give it a purpose, combine it with something else, or transfer it through an AI model. Give it purpose. Why am I doing this? Exactly as Erik said. When they have substantial info that they can trust and finally make decisions on actual proofs, not I think this or I think that, now we can say I know this, I know that, then they will be able to trust this new ethos of thinking better. And once the key decision makers are comfortable, then we can really get it moving. And this happens every company, big or small, whatever the industry is. It's going to be the same story. Get people to trust it.
So as we start to wrap this up then, starting with you perhaps, Conrad, what is one piece of advice or one call to action to any of the players in this ecosystem that would help enable more data-driven health?
If I can say, I'm going to speak about something very, very particular. One of the biggest challenges that we find is the incomplete data aspect. So we sometimes take it for granted. We assume that there is a certain amount of data, and the data is not necessarily complete, that we can use it for our ideas. So once we've gone through all that, then we're stuck with some aspect. So we encourage more and more industries that are involved with the creation of data, and maybe influencers with policymakers, to consider that whatever is being digitalized, we give it a scope, and we try to understand how that will be used, not only because it's stored in a database and it's being used by the clerk or the professional, but also how just even sometimes one or two fields or two aspects can make a whole difference to complete something that can be much useful later on. That's my...
Erik, how about you?
Well, I want to go a step back, because when we want to collect data and do all kind of good stuff with it, we need to have platforms that collect the data and create this value. Now, I'm talking here on behalf also of the smaller organizations. And I think that Microsoft is doing a great thing, and you have really large organization with a lot of money, you know, to keep things going. But also true innovation is also coming from smaller organizations, like also the ones that are pitching here, you know, and I started also from the kitchen table and see, you know, how you started from scratch to build something up. And by far we are not there yet, and we're struggling every day to find our position in this space. Now, we just heard the Minister of Health saying 6 points that are really important when innovation will happen, like it needs to be creative value, it needs to be user-friendly, it needs to be safe, secure, training, etc. I would like to add one thing. It needs to be paid, right? And there I see a challenge, and also I think an opportunity for governments to make sure that for some way the reimbursement of these kind of platforms so that we can collect data is really organized in a good way. In the Netherlands, we are taking steps, but not as far as we'd like to see it. We see other European countries that do better, and we really want to avoid a situation that companies like us saying, the Netherlands, the EU, maybe we should start looking at other regions of the world. And then innovation is flooding away, and I think we have to really be careful for that.
Thank you. Alexei.
To add to what Conrad and Erik said, because I agree with all their points, whenever applying tech to anything, let alone health, in order to establish this whole idea of trust, I think that tech should be explained. My model, for instance, is thinking this because A, B, C. I am giving you this prescription because I found this. At least if you're going to make decisions for a person, explain why. And this is how you establish trust. Because the quicker we do that, the more that we can establish these patterns of trusting my data with your systems, and the ecosystem that I said can come together.
Amazing. Thank you very much all for joining me. A round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.